Welcome to the Deep Dive. We take complex source material, really dense stuff sometimes, and try to pull out the insights you need to be, well, thoroughly informed.
Glad to be here.
Today, we are wading into something pretty fascinating. It's this intersection of, I guess, cosmology and maybe law, jurisprudence. It's about Adam's dominion. Specifically, what were the actual limits like space and time of the first Adam's original authority?
It's a question that really demands precision, you know? The sources you've brought today, they push us away from these common, sometimes kind of romanticized ideas about Adam having this huge, sweeping power.
Right.
Our mission really is to strictly define the scope of that delegated temporary rulership God gave Adam in the garden. We're looking at these limits not just as, well, limitations, but as evidence of a very focused legal strategy.
A legal strategy?
Yeah, tied directly to the ultimate purpose of creation, the integrity of the commandment itself, and ultimately the final judgment.
Okay, so often we think, Adam's dominion, it affects everything, the kingdoms of the world in this massive, universal sense.
That's the common picture.
But these sources are saying, hold on. We're unpacking the idea that Adam's power was actually surprisingly constrained.
Yeah.
Limited both spatially, like where exactly could he use it, and temporally when, or what time periods even mattered for his job.
And this confinement, this is what the sources are calling the confined kingdom.
A confined kingdom, I like that.
If we really grasp this perspective, it completely reframes the whole legal contest of the fall, doesn't it?
How so?
It suggests the conflict wasn't about God losing some vast, unlimited control over the entire cosmos. It was more about a critical legal breach, but within a very specific, carefully confined jurisdiction, a jurisdiction set up specifically for a test.
That really does narrow the focus and, frankly, raises the stakes right there in that small space. So we're going to challenge some assumptions today. Assumptions about the universe's scale, maybe the timeline of dinosaurs.
Oh, yes, the dinosaurs come up.
And the whole legal nature of Satan's temporary control. It sounds like a cosmic court drama, but played out on maybe the smallest stage imaginable.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, let's unpack this. All right, let's start with the where. The geography, or maybe the domain of control. When the sources talk about Hades, this realm where Satan is confined, they introduce a truly massive scale. They suggest it might be the entire universe.
Yeah, and this is where we need to get precise with the terms the sources use. This place, Hades, where the adversary, who the source calls Satan Garada, Satan the oppressor.
Satan the oppressor, okay.
Where he's confined, it's defined not just as a place, but almost as a condition. Hades is the darkness, the realm of lawlessness. It's the sphere where Satan's unauthorized oppression was already happening.
Unauthorized oppression, got it.
And the really radical claim here is that this sphere, this realm of lawlessness, it might actually encompass the entire material universe, not just Earth.
Wow. Okay, that is a staggering jump in scale. The entire universe as Hades. What's the evidence? How do the sources back that up? Linking the whole cosmos to this domain of oppression.
They go straight to the creation account, Genesis 1. Now, that's obviously a common focus for theology, but these sources give it a unique legal spin.
Okay.
Genesis 1 lays out the cosmological setup, right? Creation of light and darkness on day 1, the firmament, the sky on day 2, then dry land on day 3. But crucially, the big light sun, moon, stars, they don't get made and placed until day 4.
Ah, right. I remember that order. So the basic structure, light, dark, heavens, earth, it exists before the things we normally think of as cosmic light sources are put in.
Exactly. And this order, the sequence, is interpreted as suggesting that the very first action setting up the physical structure of the whole created order happened against this backdrop of existing darkness.
Which the source connects to Hades.
Precisely. If that light-dark separation on day 1 applies to the whole nascent universe, then the scope of Hades has to be cosmic. It's the initial, sort of unfinished, lawless domain into which God begins to insert order and law.
Okay, so Hades is this vast container, the universe, potentially, inherently vulnerable to lawlessness. But then the sources immediately slam on the brakes with this earthly ceiling concept. No matter how big Hades is, Adam's job, his authority, was strictly confined.
This is the crucial balancing act in the source material. You have this potentially infinite stage Hades, the universe, but the main actor's jurisdiction. It's microscopic in comparison. God gave Adam delegated temporary authority only over the Garden of Eden.
It's the garden.
Just the garden, with that specific mandate, dress it and keep it, Genesis 2.15.
And keep it, that implies guarding it, right? Protecting it from something.
Presumably from the lawlessness of the surrounding Hades, yes. So the sources really emphasize this. Adam, even with this temporary delegated power, he could not leave Earth. His power was strictly, absolutely limited to the earthly domain. That's the earthly ceiling.
An absolute ceiling. So he had no mandate, no right, no ability to claim authority over anything outside Earth, life on other planets, other realms. None of that was his business.
None of it. Zero authority beyond Earth. This is critical. It means when the devil tempts Christ, showing him all the kingdoms of the world.
Luke 4.5, yeah.
That term world, whether it's cosmos or oikoumene in the Greek, it had a very specific, very constrained Earth-centric meaning. It absolutely did not mean the universe or other cosmic realms.
That's a huge legal limitation, because if Adam's power had reached into the cosmos, say, to Mars or somewhere,
The whole story the Bible tells would be completely different. The source argues that the Bible's silence on Adam ruling other planets isn't just an oversight, it's confirmation of the constraint.
So why? Why make this distinction? Hades is universal potentially, but Adam's mission is just planetary. Why is that setup so fundamental to the divine plan, according to these sources?
Because it brings in this core principle that runs through all the source material. The economy of knowledge.
The economy of that.
Yeah, the source basically says, look, if the scope of Adam's mission was larger, if ruling other cosmic realms was actually relevant to God's purpose for him, the Bible would have told us. God reveals exactly what humanity needs to know to fulfill its specific purpose and no more.
Okay, so the information is tailored to the task.
Exactly. And the proof, they argue, is that the Creator himself, the Son, when he came into Hades to fix things, he only intervened in earthly matters. That proves anything outside Earth is just irrelevant to the core mission. The mission of fulfilling God's will by proving the commandment right here.
Wow. So the sources are claiming the entire unimaginably vast universe is ultimately irrelevant to the legal outcome being decided here on Earth. That feels incredibly radical. It seems to fly in the face of a lot of theology that sees humanity as, representative rulers over all creation.
It is radical, no doubt.
Yeah.
But the source defends it out of necessity. It argues that whatever's happening outside Earth, whatever other creatures God might have placed elsewhere, the entire created order, the whole cosmic Hades, will be eternally impacted by the proof achieved inside this tiny earthly domain.
So the test case here sets the precedent for everything else.
That's the idea. The integrity of the commandment is tested here, and the result determines the stability of the future of the rest of creation. We only need to know about the worlds of humans and angels. Paul mentions this, right? Being a spectacle to worlds, angels, and men.
1 Corinthians 4.9, yeah. And Hebrews 2.5, the world to come not subject to angels.
Right. We only need that knowledge because it's sufficient for our role in the plan. Anything more, the source implies, is just a distraction from the test at hand.
Okay, so we've set the stage. Hades is the universal container, potentially filled with darkness and lawlessness. But Earth is the very specific, tightly confined legal stage, the courtroom, if you will, where the verdict gets rendered. Right, that sets the spatial boundaries. Now let's apply that same tight focus to time. And here's where it gets really interesting, you said, because the sources use that same economy of knowledge idea to basically dismiss huge chunks of geological history.
Yeah, the temporal restriction is tied right into the legal needs of the mission. The core argument doesn't waver. Whatever happened before Adam was created, how long certain areas existed, what creatures might have lived, vast stretches of time passing outside the garden, it's all considered entirely irrelevant.
Irrelevant? Why?
Irrelevant to God's plan to bring rest to creation. And how is that rest supposed to come? Through Adam successfully proving the commandment.
So it's like in a court case, right? The lawyers object to evidence from before the specific event in question. Objection, relevance.
Exactly. The legal system demands focus on the point of law. And in this case, the point of law is the commandment given to Adam. So anything before that specific legal event, it's extraneous information. It doesn't bear on the case.
So the source is saying the existence of creatures, or billions of years before Adam, it just has no relevance to the purpose.
No relevance to the central purpose, and therefore the source tells us we don't need to be curious about it. It's almost like a theological firewall. It's built to keep our focus strictly on the short, biblically defined history of humanity and the commandment test.
Okay, but this stance immediately crashes head-on into, standard science, deep-time paleontology, which brings us, as you mentioned, straight to the dinosaur hypothesis.
Right.
The source directly takes on the common claim, the scientific consensus, really, that carnivorous dinosaurs lived, died out millions of years before Adam ever existed.
Yes, and it's important to note the author of the source material explicitly says that deep time claim, the idea of creatures existing millions of years before Adam is false. But interestingly, they still engage with the theological problem that hypothesis would create, even while rejecting the premise.
And that's the aha moment, the theological contradiction.
That's the aha moment, the contradiction inherent in having pre-Adamic carnivores.
Okay, break down that contradiction for us. Within this specific legal framework, why is a T-Rex chomping on another dinosaur before the fall a theological impossibility?
It comes down to the definition of the curse, Genesis 3.17. The curse was the direct result of Adam's failure, his sin, and it brought specific physical consequences into the world: thorns, thistles, painful toil, suffering, and crucially for this point, the entry into the domain of fleshly desires.
Fleshly desires, meaning?
Meaning the law of the jungle, survival of the fittest, the need to kill to survive.
So the curse is basically sin's dominion becoming physically manifest in the world.
Yes. So the source poses the question, how could a cursed physical body, a body literally engineered to require the violent taking of life just to eat, how could that exist before the sin that supposedly brought the curse into being? If creatures like, say, carnivorous dinosaurs, and the source mentions maybe Behemoth and Leviathan from Job 40 and 41 fit here, if they existed before the fall and were already eating flesh, it implies one of two things. Either suffering, death, and the law of the jungle were part of God's original very good design,
Which seems unlikely.
or it implies that Satan's influence had already caused the physical world to fall, to become cursed, before Adam was even put in charge.
Which would undermine Adam's role and the whole test scenario?
Exactly. Both options contradict the Edenic ideal. Before the curse, the earth, or at least Eden, the specific domain under the commandment, operated under the rule of harmony in life. Isaiah talks about this future restoration, but implies it's a return to an original state. The wolf and lamb feeding together, the lion eating straw like an ox.
Isaiah 65.25.
Right. So pre-fall carnivores just fundamentally violate the integrity of that original command-ruled environment. If God's decree was peace and life, then creatures that must kill to live would make God the author of suffering before the legal failure that mandated the curse. It doesn't compute theologically for the source.
Okay, so the theological timeline forces the source to reject the deep time separation between dinosaurs and humans. So what is the source's alternative view on dinosaurs? Where did they come from? When did they live?
The source maintains they were simply part of the creation week, included in the creation of great sea creatures or beasts of the earth alongside everything else. They weren't separated by millions of years.
So they lived alongside Adam, or at least contemporary with early humans.
That's the implication. They were just larger, maybe more dangerous versions of other created animals, like lions or whales are large and potentially dangerous. Their extinction wasn't due to some pre-Adamic cataclysm millions of years ago.
So why did they go extinct then, in this view?
The source suggests they simply became extinct faster than other creatures after the fall, in the harsh, cursed world. Precisely because they were so large, maybe needed vast territories, huge amounts of food. They were just less survivable in the difficult conditions that came with the curse, more vulnerable than smaller creatures.
Okay, I have to pause again here. Because for many people listening, who accept standard geological and paleontological dating, this is, well, it's a radical rewriting of Earth's history. How does the source handle the massive amount of scientific evidence that seems to point towards deep time, radiometric dating, fossil layers?
That's a very fair challenge, and the source knows it's pushing against the mainstream here. It tries to neutralize that scientific consensus by bringing up several counterclaims you sometimes hear in these kinds of debates.
Like what?
First, it alleges that scientists have actually found dinosaur fossils mixed in with fossils of modern animals, suggesting they lived together, not separated by eons.
Okay, controversial, but okay. What else?
Second, it pretty much dismisses standard dating methods, radiometric dating, carbon dating for more recent things, as unreliable or even bogus when applied to deep time. The implication is they're based on flawed assumptions about decay rates or initial conditions.
Right, the unprovable assumptions argument.
And the third point is interesting. It tries to link historical records directly to these creatures.
Oh, so?
It mentions historical artifacts, legends, records from both Eastern and Western cultures, sometimes only a few centuries old, that seem to depict creatures looking remarkably like known dinosaur fossils. Think about, dragon legends across the globe, or specific carvings or drawings of long-necked creatures found in ancient temples or manuscripts.
So the source interprets those not as myths, but as folk memories, or actual depictions of creatures that coexisted with humans much more recently.
Exactly. Fitting them into a short post-Adamic timeline rather than seeing them as purely mythological or separated by millions of years.
Okay. Whether you accept that historical reinterpretation or not, the source then connects this back to the legal situation. The idea of creatures existing before Adam, even if they weren't dinosaurs, lacked a protector.
That's right. Even if you had, say, peaceful herbivores existing for ages before Adam, they still lacked their appointed guardian. Adam was put in Eden to dress it and keep it, protect it.
It's Genesis 2.15 again.
Without that appointed delegate, that representative of God's authority on site, any pre-Adamic creatures would have been completely vulnerable. Vulnerable to suffering under Satan's already existing lawless influence and oppression because Satan was already confined to Hades, which included Earth.
But would that suffering have been as bad as post-fall suffering? Was the curse already sort of active?
There's nuance to the source notes there. A potential counter-argument. Since the official curse, the thorns, the thistles, the guaranteed painful toil from Genesis 3 hadn't technically begun yet.
Because Adam hadn't failed yet.
Right. So the suffering might not have been as intense or as systematized as it became after the fall. Satan's influence was lawless, but maybe not fully unleashed in the same way. However, the author ultimately circles back and reaffirms the main belief. No significant, long-extinct creatures like dinosaurs existed before Adam. The timeline for creation, the fall, and the curse are all tightly, inextricably linked. It all has to serve the legal requirements of the test placed on Adam.
Okay, so Adam is placed on this very specific stage Earth within a very specific time frame post-creation, pre-fall. And he has this high-stakes mission. It wasn't just about, tending roses and naming animals. He was a strategic placement, an insertion of light God's law, God's order, into the vast darkness of Hades, the realm of lawlessness.
That's precisely the framing. Hades was the domain of lawlessness, oppression, darkness. God deliberately established Eden, the domain of the commandment, the light right smack in the middle of it. This isn't just passive guarding, it's strategic. It's establishing a sanctuary.
A beachhead, almost.
You could see it that way. And this action, placing a holy zone within an adversarial territory, the source compares it to a major event later in the Bible.
Which one?
It's compared to God giving the land of Canaan to Israel. Remember, God gave Israel the title deed, the authority over Canaan, before the wicked Canaanite nations were fully driven out.
Joshua 1.2, yeah. The land is yours, now go take it.
Exactly. The legal transfer of authority happened while the enemy was still physically present. Israel, the delegate, had to actively cleanse the territory. The source says it was similar with Adam. God gave Adam temporary authority over Earth, or at least Eden, even though Satan's lawless influence already permeated the wider domain of Hades.
Okay, that analogy makes sense. And the sources then really elevate Eden's status, don't they? It's not just a nice garden. They describe it using temple language, calling it a holy of holies.
The imagery is really strong, almost undeniable once you see it. It draws heavily on the tabernacle and temple blueprints, like from Exodus 25. Eden was the central sanctuary, the place where God and his delegate Adam would meet.
What were the specific features?
Well, it housed the tree of life, a symbol of God's direct provision and presence. And then after the fall, think about what guards the way back to the tree of life.
Cherubim and a flaming sword. Genesis 3.24.
Exactly. Cherubim, flaming sword, guarding the way. That's Ark of the Covenant imagery right there. The source interprets this as implying the conceptual presence of the throne, the ark itself, the physical focus of God's covenant, his law, his presence. Adam was meant to live there, rule with God from this central command post, bringing God's order out into the chaos of Hades.
Wow. Okay, that reframes Adam's failure even more dramatically. He wasn't just eating a forbidden fruit, he was abandoning his post, deserting the command center, the Holy of Holies.
And abandoning his role as the primary instrument of judgment. That was his mandate, according to these sources. His job was to conquer Satan Garada, the oppressor, and anyone or anything that sided with him, to stop Satan's lawless influence from corrupting the whole kingdom God intended to build on earth.
So Adam was supposed to be the executioner, like Israel was supposed to be against the Canaanites.
That's the parallel drawn. He was God's appointed agent to enforce the commandment and cleanse the realm.
What would that have looked like? If Adam had actually succeeded past the test, resisted Satan, what would have happened then, according to the sources?
Oh, they paint a picture of a massive spiritual and physical transformation. Adam, using the authority God gave him, would have actively confined or maybe even expelled the fallen angels operating in the earthly domain. Think like Revelation 20, binding Satan, or Matthew 10, disciples given authority over demons.
It's a real cleansing.
A complete cleansing. He would have dealt with any wicked creatures, anything that had submitted to lawlessness under Satan's influence. He would have secured Earth as a true sanctuary, pushing back against the universal darkness of Hades.
And what about the animals and future humans?
The animals would have remained obedient, as they were when Adam named them. And future generations of humans, Adam's descendants, they would have still had free will, and they would have been continually tested, like maybe that test mentioned at the end of Revelation 20, after the millennium. Those humans who failed their own tests of free will, they would have been confined or expelled by the established righteous authority, maintaining the purity and integrity of the earthly kingdom.
So it sounds like a complete, immediate, successful setup of God's rule on Earth, all done through a human delegate, a perfect world established right away. But then we hit this really complex point in the source material, a kind of paradox. Even if Adam had won, the sources say creation still couldn't be completed without something like the cross.
Yes, this is a critical, perhaps difficult nuance, but absolutely central to the source's argument. Adam's failure obviously set the stage for the cross as we know it, but the source insists that creation, even a victorious Adam's creation, could not reach its final, stable, completed state without a profound display of God's love, like the cross or something equivalent.
Why? If Adam won, if sin was contained, if the law was upheld, why would you still need a demonstration of sacrificial love?
To perfect the creature's free will.
Perfect free will. How does love perfect free will? Isn't freedom itself enough?
Not according to this reading. The idea is that mere freedom to choose, even in a perfect environment, will always leave creatures vulnerable, potentially unstable. There's always the risk of future sin, future rebellion somewhere down the line. Think Romans 5:8, God demonstrates his love, or 1 John 4:0, love consists in this.
Right.
The creation, all free-willed beings, must witness the depth, the sheer extent of the Creator's love. They have to see his willingness to sacrifice everything, his very self, even for the unworthy, before their own free will can be considered truly complete, truly anchored, eternally stable. Without seeing that ultimate demonstration of sacrificial love, they'd remain, in some sense, vulnerable.
Wow. Okay. So hypothetical. Adam wins, confines Satan, cleanses earth, establishes God's rule. What then? How could have shown that love? What would the cross equivalent have been in a world without human sin needing atonement?
The source doesn't specify the exact how, but it insists God would have had to institute some different means, some other profound, self-giving act, perhaps not involving redemption from sin, but demonstrating that same depth of love to perfect the free will of angels and humans. Adam's failure simply dictated the specific method the demonstration took, the cross, focused on redeeming sinners.
So, in a strange way, Adam's failure was factored in, almost planned for.
The source suggests God's plan factored in Adam's intended defeat, or at least the high probability of it, as perhaps the most direct or maybe even necessary path toward creating beings whose free will was eternally stabilized because they had witnessed the ultimate proof of sacrificial love in response to the ultimate failure.
Okay, so Adam fails. Let's get into the immediate legal fallout. The moment Adam lost to Satan, disobeyed the command, he becomes, as Peter says, a slave to whatever has mastered him, a slave to sin. John 8:342. The whole legal landscape of earth shifts instantly.
Instantly. That failure triggers the curse. Genesis 3:17. And the sources are very specific. The curse is entry into Satan's rule. It's not just a punishment, it's a jurisdictional handover.
A handover.
Yes, because Adam was the delegate, everything under his delegated rule fell with him. Not just him personally, but the physical creation he was stewarding. The earth, the soil itself, it falls under Satan's dominion, and that manifests physically. Thorns, thistles, hardship, suffering.
So Adam literally lost the keys to the kingdom. The temporary rulership God had officially given him, he fumbled it, handed it over to the adversary.
He did. Now, the source notes a slight scholarly nuance here, a point of debate reflected in the notes you gave me.
What's that?
Did Adam lose the authority directly to Satan as a personified entity? Or did he lose it to sin as an abstract principle or power, which Satan then exploits?
Ah, okay. Does the distinction matter much in practice?
Maybe not for the final outcome. Whether it was directly to Satan or to the principle of sin, the result was the same. The earth, Adam's delegated domain, came under the oppression of the evil one. Satan gained immense leverage he didn't have before.
Okay, let's really nail down this difference then. Before Adam sinned, Satan's presence, his operations in Hades' earth, strictly lawless. He was just an intruder, an oppressor.
Absolutely. Confined to the broader domain of Hades, maybe, but operating on Earth through sheer force, deception, totally unauthorized, zero legal standing in Eden. Or over Adam, he was invading.
But after Adam, the legal delegate fails the test. The source says Satan's rule suddenly appears lawful. That's a critical distinction. Why only appear lawful?
Because of that principle of legal delegation we talked about. God had officially, legally, granted Adam temporary authority. He was the rightful tenant, the appointed ruler. When Adam, the guy with the legal standing, lost the contest through disobedience, well, it gave Satan a claim.
A claim based on Adam's forfeiture.
Right. A claim over the physical domain Adam had ruled. So in the eyes of, say, the angelic host, or maybe even creation itself, it looked like a legitimate transfer of authority, even though it was achieved through lies and a violation of God's ultimate command.
So Satan is basically operating with a stolen deed. It looks kind of official because he got it from the previous owner, but the transaction itself was fraudulent.
That's a perfect analogy, a stolen deed. It gives him the ability to stand up, point to Adam's failure, and say, see, I obtained this authority from your chosen representative.
And this temporary perceived legality is actually crucial for how God's counter-strategy, the legal plan for redemption, unfolds.
Okay, but I hear the emphasis on perceived. The sources are absolutely insistent. Satan's rule can never be truly lawful. Never. We have to keep hammering this point. It's fundamentally, intrinsically illegal. Why? Because the entire creation is ultimately governed by God's commandment, his law. Any violation of that commandment, which defines Satan's entire mode of operation, his whole dominion, is inherently illegal within God's created order. His rule is based on lawlessness, built on lies, sustained by rebellion. It can never be legal.
Okay, if it's fundamentally illegal, then why is it tolerated? Why didn't God just step in immediately, zap Satan, and reclaim Earth the moment Adam fell? If the rule is illegal, why allow it to continue for millennia?
This brings us to this profound concept the source calls the suspension of judgment.
Suspension of judgment.
Judgment is being deliberately held back,
Yes.
suspended, until the lawlessness is fully, publicly, undeniably proved to the entire creation. John 12:48 talks about the word itself judging in the last day. God doesn't just act on raw power, he operates according to law and truth. He waits, in a sense, for the cup of iniquity to be filled.
Can you give an example? How do the sources illustrate this waiting period, this suspension?
They point to the example of the Amorites in Genesis 15. Remember, God tells Abraham his descendants won't inherit the promised land for 400 years. Why the delay? Because, God says, the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full.
Genesis 15.1 sting.
Right. God waited. He waited. He allowed that wicked party to continue operating until their lawlessness demonstrated itself beyond any doubt, reaching a point of undeniable conviction for anyone watching. The source says it's similar with Satan. God is allowing this temporary illegal oppression on earth to continue for two main reasons.
What are they?
First, crucially, to provide the time and context needed to save the first Adam and his entire enslaved human lineage. Redemption takes time and happens within history.
Okay, and second?
Second, to prove, through humanity's suffering under Satan and through the subsequent demonstration of Christ's perfect obedience and sacrificial love, the eternal truth, the goodness, the sheer integrity of the original commandment, to prove it not just to humans, but to all of creation, all free-willed beings.
So the appearance of legality allows the situation to persist, and the suspension of judgment allows the trial, essentially, to play out publicly. The evidence of lawlessness has to be fully presented before the sentence is carried out.
Exactly. The trial must proceed. The source even suggests that if God had just summarily punished Satan without this whole process, without letting the lawlessness fully manifest and be judged by the standard of the commandment proven by Christ, God himself might have seemed, well, arbitrary. He might have had to explain his actions to the cosmos, defend his own integrity.
Becoming a spectacle himself, as the source put it.
Right. But by allowing the lawlessness to play out, the commandment proves itself through Christ's victory over it. And the resulting judgment on Satan is then universally understood as perfectly just and necessary.
Okay, so the illegal rule continues under suspension. Then, the game changes completely. The moment the Son, the last Adam, arrives on the scene, enters Hades. The legal situation shifts again dramatically. The sources argue that temporary authority, the delegation given to the first Adam, it officially ceased the instant the Son showed up.
That's the claim. Because the Son is the rightful heir, he's the successor. We see this in the parable of the tenants, Luke 20 and Hebrews 1, the Son appointed heir of all things.
Right.
That delegation to Adam was always temporary. It was tied specifically to the test of the first Adam. So when the last Adam, the ultimate king, the owner, steps onto the stage of Hades, which is Earth, the first Adam's temporary lease, essentially, is instantaneously absorbed. It reverts back to the rightful eternal ruler.
Yeah.
Legally, the first Adam's delegation is terminated on the spot.
And Satan's claim,
Mm-hmm.
which looked maybe vaguely plausible before because he got it from Adam.
Yeah.
That claim is now completely worthless against the Son.
Utterly invalidated. Satan could not claim authority over the Son. Why? Because the Son was sinless. The very mechanisms of the transfer from Adam's sin and death had zero power over Christ. Romans 6.23, the wages of sin is death. Christ didn't earn those wages. So the transfer mechanism completely failed when it encountered the last Adam.
Even though his authority is now legally kaput, Satan still resists. He famously tempts Christ, offering him those kingdoms of the world again.
Luke 4.5 again, yes. That moment of temptation and Satan's continued defiance throughout Christ's ministry. Remember the parable where the tenants kill the son thinking they'll get the inheritance? Luke 20.13.
Yeah.
All of that just serves to confirm the complete, absolute, incorrigible lawlessness of Satan's dominion. Even with the rightful king standing right there, officially terminating the temporary rule and reclaiming his inherent authority, Satan still defied him. The source notes this is an escalation. If Satan's initial resistance against God's command through Adam was illegal, openly rejecting the authority of the Son, the King himself, is an even more profound level of sin. Hebrews 10 talks about trampling the Son of God underfoot.
Okay, so the Son arrives, the delegation ends, Satan's claim is void. The Son clearly has the power. He calms storms with a word. He raises the dead. He says he could call legions of angels.
Matthew 8, Matthew 26, yeah. Immense power.
So why the further delay? If Satan's rule is now doubly legal, why tolerate it for another 2,000 years and counting since the resurrection? Why didn't Christ just finish the job right then and there?
This brings us back full circle to the source's emphasis on God's love, specifically his love for the first Adam and his descendants. The reason the Son temporarily overlooks or tolerates Satan's continued illegal rule after his arrival is explicitly stated. It's to provide the necessary means to save the first Adam and all of humanity enslaved with him. John 18.36, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were, his servants would fight. He chose not to fight then.
So, the continued suffering of humanity, the ongoing spiritual battle under Satan's influence, it's a direct consequence, a side effect of God's patience and his plan to rescue the very delegate who failed the test in the first place. The cost of offering salvation is the temporary continuation of this illegal oppression.
That seems to be the logic presented. It's the great, tragic, cosmic cost. If Christ had immediately crushed Satan and executed final judgment the moment he arrived, or even right after the resurrection, the means of salvation for fallen humanity, specifically the cross and its implications unfolding through history, might not have had its full legal effect, its full demonstrative power. The opportunity to actually save the enslaved race, to call them out of bondage through faith, would potentially be lost.
So the illegal rule continues, tolerated by God's mercy.
Tolerated, yes, until the truth of the commandment is fully proven and vindicated through the cross, the resurrection, the ascension, and the witness of the church through history. Only then, when that entire process is complete, will the Son execute that final decisive judgment on Satan.
Okay, let's pivot then to the ultimate outcome of all this, the end game, the new earth. The source tackles this question. Will this new earth, Setang is the term used, you said.
Sentang, yes, contrasted with Jigu, the current Earth.
Will this new Earth be the same physical location as our current Earth, just renovated, or somewhere else entirely?
The source is actually quite upfront about this being speculative. They confess the location is ultimately unknown. Will it be our Earth, totally restored, maybe purified by fire? Will it be a new star, a different planet? Will it be inside the current domain of Hades or outside? Is it related to that sea of glass mentioned in Revelation? These are all possibilities the source acknowledges they can't definitively answer.
But they are clear on its essential qualities, regardless of where it is.
Oh, absolutely clear on that. The new Earth, Setang, will definitely be land. It won't be ethereal, and it will be completely, utterly free from sin, the curse, death, suffering. Micah 4.3, nations won't lift up sword anymore.
Total peace.
Total peace. And crucially, it seems it has to retain environments and functions recognizably similar to Earth. The source specifically mentions things like farming, marriage still existing in some form perhaps, though that's debated, and certainly this perfect, peaceful coexistence. Wolf and lamb together, old men and women sitting in the streets, children playing, Zechariah 8, Isaiah 65 again. It sounds like a perfected version of earthly life.
Okay, but here's a fascinating point. The source argues there are scriptural clues that mandate some kind of spatial connection between the current domain of Hades Earth and the new Earth. It can't just be some random, unrelated galaxy light years away.
Yes, this is a really powerful piece of deductive reasoning in the source. It hinges on the prophecy about Satan at the end of the thousand-year reign, the Age of Paradise.
What happens then?
Satan is briefly released from his confinement, the abyss, and what does he immediately do? He goes out to deceive the nations and gathers them for battle against the camp of the saints in the beloved city, which is the New Jerusalem. Revelation 20, Ezekiel 38 describing Gog's attack.
Okay, so Satan's released and attacks the New Jerusalem. Why does that tell us something about the geography?
Think about it. If the New Earth, where the New Jerusalem is located, were somewhere completely separate, completely outside the existing scope of the conflict, some other dimension, some distant star, totally inaccessible from where Satan is confined, how could he possibly attack it?
Ugh. He's confined to a specific realm, Hades, Earth, the Abyss. To be released from there and then immediately attack the New Jerusalem, the target has to be reachable from the point of release.
Exactly. It implies the new Earth must be spatially related, somehow contiguous or accessible to the current Earth-Hades domain. It can't be totally disconnected.
That really narrows down the possibilities, doesn't it? It suggests the whole cosmic drama remains remarkably localized, even into the eternal state.
It does, which leads directly to the source's final hypothesis, their most likely scenario.
Which is?
If Hades is indeed essentially synonymous with the current Earth's local domain, this sphere of conflict, then the new Earth, Setang, will most likely be a recovered, cleansed, restored, renewed version of the first Earth, Jigu,
Renewed how?
achieved by permanently driving Satan and all his forces, all lawlessness, out of this first Earth. The cleansing of the Earth by fire isn't annihilation, perhaps, but purification, restoration. It means the conflict concludes, legally and physically, exactly where it began. The temporary confined kingdom becomes the very stage for the eternal, perfectly restored kingdom. Hashtag tag outro.
Wow, that was quite a journey. An incredible deep dive into theological jurisprudence. We started with Adam's mission being intensely focused, strategically confined, spatially stuck on Earth, temporally only relevant after creation and before the fall for his test. And that constraint wasn't just random, it was the whole legal foundation for proving the commandment, which then necessitated the son's arrival and takeover.
It really highlights the legal tightness, the precision of God's plan as presented in these sources. It forces you, the listener, to appreciate that maybe our knowledge is limited to what's necessary for our purpose right here on Earth. The sheer size of the universe almost becomes secondary. The focus narrows right down to the integrity of God's command, demonstrated right here on this one, confined, absolutely central stage.
And that final analysis, it leaves us with a really thought-provoking question, doesn't it? If Adam's temporary job was meant to wipe out evil, establish God's kingdom, and complete free will, and his spectacular failure made the cross necessary, that ultimate display of sacrificial love, what does that tell you about the true weight, the monumental significance of obeying that original commandment?
Yeah, here's a thought maybe to mull over. If the entire universe, all its vastness, just serves as the dark container, the sort of irrelevant backdrop for this Earth-only legal and ethical drama about the commandment, what does that imply about the centrality and maybe the unique burden of humanity's role in the whole of creation? Is the universe just a stage for an Earth-only legal argument?
That is a profound thought to end on. Thank you so much for walking us through these incredibly detailed sources today. A truly fascinating deep dive. We hope you, listening, feel thoroughly informed. Until next time.